Everyone's here. Go to the restroom. We got a little rock.
Oh my gosh, that was a great game last night.
It's funny at one point I was in a grade 3 and then I was like, oh, whatever, this is what I'm doing. And I just, boy, are we spoiled. We just, you know, and then of course we got choices of how they were this week.
We've been having fun, guide, but it's always fun when it's like a call or like somebody just pulls so I've got a lot. Yeah, we just got engaged right before so when session was coming up, I was like, yeah, well, we started, we're getting ready to start on that dry farm, and so, yeah, everywhere, so, and then we get the vendors on, all that kind of stuff. You know, he's a person, you know, local all the days, you know.
Where did she fit his wedding? Yeah, I'm I didn't figure it out. I don't think so. But I was like, she was like, I'm not the high-end people, the great photographers, and videographers. I know. It's just, this is the first you look at Charlottesville, Danny says, yeah, I thought I had. Cotter emailed me and said, are we approved? And I said, shoot, I thought we were Chicago Coast.
Sorry, we had 1, 2, 3. What's that? Short answer, yes. Long answer,
every time I talk to him, it's always
yeah, in fact, at 5, I gotta be at CNL.
As bad as you think I did. My primary appointment next week.
That's fine. Yes. Right there. Rob was gonna be a little mad. What's the issue?
So that I was never notified of a hearing. I never got any restitution. All I know now is that you're good. What's going on. Well, because that's a insurance. Because that is not my goal.
Yeah, well, that's why when I thought of that,
So,
I mentioned those.
the data
I'm upping rule as well. I think one bill that was going to send out I have people at home that are really concerned about all right, here we go. We got form.
Well, thank you for making our forum here. Okay, cool. I've got it printed out for you. Yeah, Sarah got with you. We're on it.
I'm good. All right. So call this meeting to order. House Transportation Subcommittee 2. We're going to go ahead, even though we don't have to, we're going to mark our attendance just to make sure our voting boards are working. Because they weren't yesterday. Barely have a quorum. Okay. So this will be the final meeting of this subcommittee before crossover. A couple of administrative actions before we get started hearing bills. Delegate Aird's bill, HB 1298, she's requested to be stricken. I'll accept the motion.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. Okay. Please indicate your vote for the electronic voting board.
Motion carried.
All right. And Delegate Pogge has requested that we strike her bill as well, House Bill 1406. I'll accept the motion to do so.
So moved. Second.
Please vote. Close the roll. All right. All right. Delegate Bell. We'll start with you. We'll move on.
Mr. Chair, good afternoon, members of the committee. So, this is a bill that was brought to me by a constituent. She's here with the reason she'd like to bring it. She'd like to make a brief statement describing the issue, the problem. This would be to effectively reverse a policy that VDOT put in place on purpose. In other words, they looked at this, decided to go the other direction. It's a policy decision. If you'd like to change the policy, this is the way to do it. And if you decide they're in the right policy place, then obviously you should keep the policy we have. But I'd like to, I would ask permission to have her testify to me briefly about the situation.
Absolutely. Welcome to the committee. Can you please state your name?
Jocelyn Helmbrecht.
Welcome.
Thank you. I have a 16-year-old son with significant special needs. He's severely cognitively impaired and on the autistic spectrum. And because of that diagnosis, he's a wandering risk. He has actually wandered out of the house, and by the time I found him, he was standing in the middle of the road. I think to have a sign in neighborhoods like mine would help tremendously with safety for the children. People driving down the road, a lot of times instinctively people will slow down if they see a toddler on the side of the road. If they're unaware that there's a child with special needs in the neighborhood, they won't necessarily slow down, even though my 16-year-old is just as likely to run in front of a vehicle as a 2-year-old. Another reason that I was hoping you would consider allowing the signs is in an event of an emergency. We hear occasionally of stories in the news where first responders did not know that they were dealing with an autistic child, and signals get crossed, and just for the safety to alert everybody. So driving more cautiously and just for people to have an awareness that there's a child with special needs. I never imagined what the challenges a family with a child with special needs faces until I had one. We fight and advocate for our children every day, and I'm just very hopeful that if a sign can help alleviate one of those challenges that and keep our children safe, that you would consider that.
Thank you. I'm a pediatric dentist. I see special needs patients in my office. You are your child's best advocate, but you also have a great advocate in Nelga Bell.
I do.
So,
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, you left not something out, but you did go to try to do this privately.
I did. The whole way this got started was I had put up a little tiny sign on my mailbox, and one of my neighbors complained and went to the homeowners, and the homeowners said that they reluctantly had to tell me that it was in fact not within the regulations. And a few emails back and forth, and I did say, and I was perfectly willing to hire a lawyer to fight it because I felt so strongly that my child's safety depended on it. And that's how I found out that the Department of Transportation doesn't allow those, because I thought a compromise would be maybe an official sign, but I couldn't do that either. And you know, I do advocate for my child, and I have the means that I would have hired a lawyer if I needed to, but there are a lot of families who couldn't do that, or wouldn't know how.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, just wanted to ask a question. Delegate Bell,
Yes, ma'am.
go ahead, Doug.
Yes, ma'am.
is this a subdivision and that she lives in? Is there a prohibition based on, because I know a lot of those subdivisions have special, you know, they have expectations, and I'm just.
I don't wanna speak for, I think that her specific problem is an HOA, meaning that
Uh-huh,
the neighborhood
right.
association just says you can't.
Right.
More generally, I think you'd have people on non-subdivision roads. I live in a subdivision.
Mhm.
My special needs kid, I couldn't get this for him. He's not a wanderer, so that's not a direct issue. But, I mean, you're saying that. For people of parents of special needs kids, the last few days have been a hard few weeks where people just don't know until everything's happened. And so that wasn't why I brought it, obviously, because I brought it several months ago. All right.
Mr. Chair,
Delegate-
another question.
Delegate Nguyen.
So Delegate Bell, does this then open, and, you know, I'm supportive, but does it open it up for other places, that may have a sign that may say that you're not allowed to put this sign in this community, you're not allowed to do certain things on this main street? I mean, there are a lot of rules and regulation and policies that are established by some of those subdivisions. So does this open it up for any individual to now come forth that with, I guess, deafblind or deaf and blind, or with autism or intellectual or developmental disabilities?
So two things are there.
Okay.
So if the subdivision maintains its own roads, nothing we do here matters.
Okay.
But every subdivision I know of tries to get its roads into VDOT because they'll be maintained by the state.
Okay.
So even ones that started, they built them, the developer made them, boy, they worked hard to get the gutters right and the width right, so VDOT will take over. Unless staff tells me otherwise, at that point, VDOT is in charge of the road and the rules for the road and the signs for the road and that kind of thing. Now, the second would be, I didn't wanna have a 15-page bill about each kind of sign. And frankly, don't have, I'm not a VDOT engineer, I know know, they have concerns about too many signs. At some point, sign volume becomes a problem. So all the bill does is say VDOT will do it and establish regulations. But the third thing would be, I don't want to pretend this hasn't come up before. It did come up before. VDOT can speak to you about it. 2006, they looked at it and just said, we are choosing not to do it. So it's never come up before. This has come up before. They just said you could talk to them about their concerns. If we decide as a body to do it, then they've already told me that that's their job to follow the rules we set, and we'll do the best we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's hear from VDOT.
Mr. Chair, Joanne Maxwell from VDOT. We appreciate Delegate Bell for we've had an opportunity to talk to him a little bit. He is correct. We used to have a policy in place for signage for children who children who were deaf and hard of hearing. And we put that in place in about 1988 and ended up, we rescinded, this was all on our own. We rescinded the policy in about 2007. Primarily, we had not gotten a lot of subscription or not a lot of requests, but at that point in time, some of the groups that represented individuals with disabilities had expressed, pointed out, you may be presented with some privacy concerns or issues because of some of the information you collected about the individuals, et cetera. So at the end of the day, we decided just to rescind the policy. That being said, we have no position on this bill, and if it is the will of the general assembly, we certainly can implement this, and we can pass the regulations. We would envision that we would include the various agencies, organizations that represent the various individuals that are trying to drive this legislation. So at the end of the day, we don't have a position. It's just that the circumstances at the time are what led to our decision.
All right, thank you. Anyone to speak in favor of the bill? Anyone to speak opposed to the bill? Any questions of the patron? Closing comments?
I just had a quick question, Mr. Chairman. Are we already got it in the budget for these signs, or is that going to be?
There's no budget this year because all we're asking them is to set up regs. I think you can assume that going forward. I thought about making the people pay for the sign, then I said actually we can't do that. And then it would be only rich people can have the sign set up. So this is a policy decision.
Okay.
And again, I'm assuming what VDOT's rules would come back at would be if you happen to live on a major highway where there's a major sign every 100 yards, that's not as much sign volume. If you live down in a cul-de-sac where there aren't any signs, maybe it's not as important, but it's also not such a problem to have one. And I understand there are some people that say it's privacy issues, but this will be parent driven. So if you don't want people to know that your sign has mental retardation issues, you don't get the sign. If it's so profound that you're afraid it's going to get run over, you say, privacy is privacy. I want some hint that the large young man who's sitting in the back just does not have the same, knowledge about how dangerous cars are as other cars are. If it were to pass, though, nothing would happen right away. VDOT would then go through the regulatory process and set up regs to make it happen.
Make a motion to report.
I'll second it.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? All those opposed to it? Delegate Bell, your
I thank you,
your
members of
report.
the subcommittee.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think Delegate Garrett has a appropriations committee that he's going to get to.
Well, thank you, Mr.
I
Chairman.
think I'll clear my room out.
Draw the committee's attention to House Bill 1276. And I have a substitute as well, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sure VDOT can see and check that. Do we got a substitute in front of them? Do you have a motion on the substitute? Second. Okay. Moved and second substitute.
Okay.
Everybody ready? Go ahead, Delegate Garrett. Thank you.
All right, sir, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, House Bill 1276, I believe, and the reason I'm bringing this, I think it's a common sense approach to a barrier that's sort of impacting many of Virginia's largest manufacturing and agribusiness employers. Some of those folks, and there'll probably folks here to speak to that, include Anheuser-Busch, Miller Coors, Smithfield Foods, West Rock, International Paper, as well as the Virginia Manufacturers, the Virginia Agribusiness Council, Virginia Beverage Association, Virginia Poultry, and the Virginia Loggers, just to name a few of these folks. What this bill does is it simply grants the Commissioner of Highways, which is Commissioner of VDOT, permissive authority to join a federal pilot data collection program should Congress authorize such a program. Again, that program is not authorized. There is movement in Congress to create a 10-state pilot program that would look at safety of 91,000-pound vehicles on our interstates. Today in the state of Virginia, as y'all members know, we're limited to 80,000 on our interstates because of federal prohibitions. And I'll speak to that in just a second. This pilot, should it happen, will be limited to 10 states and would require trucks wishing to transport up to 91,000 pounds to add a 6th axle. So these are not bigger trucks. They're going to have an additional axle on it. I've been told that that actually improves some of their stopping distances. And my thought is having trucks that are able to carry more weight should hopefully get some of those trucks off of I-81 and I-66, probably the most congested interstate in the nation. My other thought was we have a very unique opportunity, Delegate Jones, down your way, which is the Port of Virginia. And the other piece of paper I handed out to you all, color diagram, shows one of the other opportunities but realities of where we are today. So today, there are exempt reducible load permits that are issued by DMV, and there are 9,007 of those. 2 of those are technically reducible loads, but they're deemed by Congress to be irreducible loads. And you'll see those. Containerized cargo, there are 3,803 permits that are issued today for trucks up to 94,500 pounds that are already on our highways today. And also fluid milk, 261 permits that are already issued. So over 4,000 of the 9,000 are already issued to 94,500 pounds today that are already allowed to, particularly out of our port, Delegate Jones, out your way, sir. So what this bill does, and simply does, is it empowers the Commissioner of Highways to withdraw from, to enter or to withdraw from a federal pilot, should one be out there. My concern was, or my thought is, we need this data to be able to act, to make some decisions in our Commonwealth. We've already allowed up to 90,000 pounds several years ago for loggers. They were competing with North Carolina folks down in Southside and Southwest Virginia. We've actually added that to up to 90,000 pounds for Virginia-grown farm produce. You'll see on this list as well. So that's basically what the bill will do. You all have all heard from both sides of this issue, and I absolutely get it. My friends from the rails are here. CSX is very, very critically important to me. 18 trains a day come through the city of Lynchburg filled with coal, going to the Port of Virginia back and forth. So if I thought for a microsecond that this would disaffect folks that are very important to me, I wouldn't be carrying this legislation. I do think there's an opportunity for us to look carefully and fully at safety issues and the efficiency issues. A lot of those trucks today are not efficiently being fully loaded, and I just think it's an opportunity in that regard. So again, this is not going to mandate on any trucking companies that they do anything today. This would simply offer permissive authority should Congress, do I need to resuscitate somebody behind me?
I got it.
Just saying, just saying.
I got it.
Should, you guys, you're all over it. If you need your teeth worked on, resuscitate.
Way too old, way too old. I'm a pediatric dentist.
So, this does not, again, it does not mandate us to enter this pilot program. My concern and why I agreed to carry this bill is quite simply this. I want Virginia to have a seat at the table. We have a very unique interstate system. Because of the Port of Virginia, we're getting ready to put a lot of money into the Port of Virginia to expand its opportunities. We've got to get that containerized cargo efficiently away from the port, and I-81 out our way, Delegate Pillion, as well. It's really congested with trucks. And we've got to sort of look at this and study it. Hence the original bill. The amendment or the substitute or amendment that you all have asked for as well would in fact now ask VDOT to study this for the state of Virginia so that we could get some of that data perhaps earlier and see what the impacts are. Delegate Chairman Yancey has raised concerns, and I think rightfully so, about the wear and tear on our highways, and so I think it's important for us to look at that safety parameters as well, and whether in fact it'll accomplish a more efficient system. I don't want to impose upon your time, Mr. Chairman. I sincerely appreciate the committee's indulgence in this.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for the patron? Delegate Davis.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of questions, and Delegate Garrett, I don't know if you may have it, or maybe someone else here may. I know the pilot program has been initiated, or tried to be initiated twice in Washington through various vehicles and failed both times. Do we have any language of what may be introduced, or is being technically introduced right now in Washington around another pilot program?
So I'll phone a friend in a second, but that was really my original conversation was I wanted us to be a seat at the table. I want us to have some of those line elements of what are going to be asked in that pilot program, rather than 10 other states, perhaps out west, Midwest. They may not have our dynamics. They don't have our issues with the port, I-66, I-64 and 95, and I-90, I-81. I want our dynamics to be part of that study. So again, it's a study that is in evolution, and I'm not at the federal level, and I don't know where it is in that process, but I want us to have a seat at the table. Great questions.
I'll hold off on my questions till tomorrow.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions? Delegate Jones.
Delegate Garrett, so I know it says the pilot program shall not exceed 15 years. Does that 15 years start as soon as the federal government approves the pilot program, or does this say we're starting 15 years and we have that time for it to go, or are they tied together in terms of date?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Jones, so my understanding is should, I told these folks initially, I don't know how federal government does all of their policy programs in general.
Me neither.
So no, I respect that. So my understanding is once they decide and define what that program would look like, the element of that would be it would last no longer than 15 years. Should it show great success, I presume it could, last less than 15 years. Should it show great challenges, I suspect it could also be shortened. And by the language we have with VDOT, I think they're going to get us data probably before we'd ever get data out of the feds.
Delegate Reed.
Garrett, it's my understanding that this is really kind of changing the way that we've made these exceptions in the past, where we as the General Assembly have kind of held on to making these exceptions for additional weights, and then also building in around those what were going to be the impacts on the roads and how the authority was going to be done. And do you perceive that in the first part of your legislation that we're actually passing that authority off to the federal government or to VDOT?
So, Mr. Chairman and Delegate Reed, you're very insightful, because I have no interest in relegating any of our authority to the federal government. I think that, hence again, why I want to have a seat at the table so that we make sure that we're not in effect doing that. Federal government's going to create a pilot, should they create this pilot program. Senator Carrico has the exact same conjugate, I guess, to this in the Senate, and they are looking specifically at that question. I suspect the vehicle, should it come from the Senate, will have language that'll address that. And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my hope is at the end of today, we at least would have a vehicle from the House. I think there's no pun intended. No pun, vehicles.
Gotcha.
It's okay, you guys are
Comedy's hard.
a vehicle coming from the Senate, and we would be able to have some further conversations and perhaps, look at that in a conference committee. That would be my hope today, sir.
Delegate Collins.
Delegate Garrett, one of the questions that came up with me was the Interstate Commerce Clause. If Virginia is the only one involved in this pilot, and West Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, North Carolina do not engage in this pilot program, our trucks are not going to be able to leave the Commonwealth of Virginia. Has anybody thought about that or addressed that?
So, Mr. Chairman and Delegate Collins, my understanding is what the feds are looking at is perhaps a 10-state pilot. My understanding is Florida legislature, which is the home of CSX, interestingly, has already signed on to this process. We would not be the only member in this pilot. It would be piloted across 10 states. What I don't want is for, again, 10 other states to be the ones, and our committee is going to be stuck with, at some point in time in the future, to your point, Delegate Jones, now trying to make decisions about whether we are now going to allow 90,000 pounds on our interstates, but given some other states' data.
Delegate Collins.
But I mean no harm to your bill.
Sure.
It's just a concern of mine. So if the Southern Coalition of states, and say 10 of them, or let's say 9 of them, and it's Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, and then we're barred from being attached to them because of the Carolinas, then all we've done is created, trucks just in Virginia. So that's a question I've asked a lot of people, and they have not given me because we don't know who's gonna sign up, and I just wanna see what your comments were on that.
So, I probably have to phone a friend for, when you mentioned Commerce Clause and legal stuff.
I'm sorry, Dr. Garrett, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, absolutely. We're good. We're good.
Ken?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ken Hutchison on behalf of Anheuser-Busch. That's a great question, and one of the questions I asked very early on in the process. And the simple answer is, if no other contiguous states join the pilot, then in fact the truck traffic would be limited to Virginia. But keep in mind, what we're talking about is primarily intra-state truck traffic. So for instance, Anheuser-Busch trucking beer out of Williamsburg to all of our beer distributor partners. Westrock shipping stuff from the mill up in Covington to the Port of Virginia. So you take that, and then you take the fact that today, with all of the varying truck permits that are out there based on weight, all of these major heavy manufacturers, we have in-house logistics departments that work with our shipping partners and our trucking partners to figure out, okay, this product is going here, and we need to load it on this type of truck with this weight permit. So yes, it does perhaps introduce an extra layer of work on the part of our logistics department, but it is by no means a barrier to this pilot project collecting the data that we're hoping it will.
Delegate Rock, and then we'll get back to you next.
A couple of questions, if I may.
Sure.
So are the parameters of the federal pilot established?
Mr. Chairman, Doug Rock, no. So that is yet to be determined. And again, that's the reason why I carried this bill in the first place. I want Virginia to have a seat at the table in helping establish some of those parameters, rather than us now being relegated to simply getting their report and having to act upon it.
In the
Further question?
In the simplest term possible, please. Garrett, I understand the federal pilot yet to be fleshed out. Please explain to me, with this amendment, so your bill as amended, what does this put in motion, and how does this expand the original bill? So it sounds like application, or excuse me, now it's study, then perhaps application if they exercise that choice, and then if they're accepted, something.
I can answer it, but I tried once, so I'm gonna get another phone friend.
You're doing great.
Ken,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
committee, to your question, Doug Rock, the language before you on the amendment simply would lay out a process by which VDOT would start to have the natural conversation it would already have in consideration of whether to join a pilot if it ever comes to fruition. This language puts that process into this bill to give folks comfort that VDOT isn't just going to take the bill as originally drafted and make a decision without the benefit of asking practical questions about the implementation of joining a federal pilot. What are the barriers? What are the challenges? What are the concerns that the Commonwealth ought to think about before joining? And these are the real practical implementation questions that I think would arise through their natural process. But by putting it in writing, I think it demonstrates that the advocates for this legislation, we are very much interested in working with VDOT to identify the practical applications and questions that would arise should a federal pilot ever become an option to join.
Doug Davis.
Thank you. So, first question I have, given that VDOT's not mandated to complete its meetings and findings till November 30th, 2018, and understanding that this is what basically does the research to allow whether we should join the federal pilot program, does that mean that VDOT's barred from joining any program that gets announced prior to November 30th, 2018 before the findings are given to us or finalized?
No, this, Delegate, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Davis, this is a second enactment clause. The first bit of it, if somehow all of this moves right through and 3 months from now we hear there's going to be a pilot program, the section 1 of this, lines 10 to 16, in essence, would grant that authority to the Commissioner of Highway under the Secretary of Transportation with the approval of the Governor. So there's a degree of checks and balances, but they would be able to enter that pilot process.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes.
Given that scenario, let's say 3 months from now.
Or 6 or whatever.
Sure, it's 36 months from now, the feds do come up with, and throughout this pilot program, do we just ignore subsection 2? I mean, at that point, why do a study to see whether we should join and what issues may be when we've already said we're joining regardless? So does this go away then at that point if we jump the gun, as allowed by the bill?
Mr. Chairman and Delegate Davis, no, because Department of Transportation is the ones that would be deciding to do the whether to join the pilot program in the first place. They, on the other hand, on section 2 would be the ones that are gonna convene this work group to begin to look at this process and hopefully get back with us and tell us yes or no. Should it be good, bad, indifferent, what should be studied?
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm reading number 2 as this is a study to see what the implications could be related to being part of the federal pilot program regarding 91,000-pound trucks on our interstates. So if we're going to allow Virginia to jump the gun and join before this study is done, I'm thinking we're going to know what the impacts are. We've already put the trucks on the road. Why do this? Why do the study to say what could be the impacts of joining if we've already joined?
So, Mr. Chairman, again, the trucks are already on the road. We're giving off 4,000 permits a day to that point. They won't be able to jump the gun and join the pilot program, which doesn't exist. But I do think it's incumbent upon us to study and to make those decisions about what should be these elements before they make a decision that in fact, should the it's permissive authority, but should Congress decide that in fact they're gonna roll out a pilot program that Virginia would be one of the participants in that program.
Just may I?
Last
Well,
one.
if I get 2, Mr. Chairman, they're both kind of related.
Sure.
So I agree with you, we need to be at the federal table for the writing of whatever pilot program may come out in the future. But why is it that we need to agree to join the program to be allowed to have a seat at the table to help draft that program? And I'll put them both together, and if we go ahead and agree to join the program now, don't we give up any leverage we have to negotiate the parts of that program being drafted since they've already seen that we've already passed it as a body to join?
I would say no.
Have that read.
Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate to instead just do the study part and strike the first parts of the bill?
That would be, I'm not the patron, so you would.
So Mr. Chairman, Doug, read the difference there, again, my original intent was to make sure we had a seat at the table. If we say VDOT go study this and decide something, and in fact, Congress decides they're gonna have this pilot program, and in fact, 10 other states sign up, and we don't have a seat at the table, those states may, but I presume probably won't, have the impact of our uniqueness of our interstate highways, and specifically the Port of Virginia. This is a big deal for the port, and getting all of that, we are getting ready to spend a lot of resources and time and efforts, and have already done so at the Port of Virginia, to make sure that we can most efficiently get goods to and from the port.
So, Doug, read, this is the vehicle that he wants, so, yeah.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Would now be the proper time for us, I agree, I think we need to do everything that the patron's talking about. It would now be the proper time for a substitute, or is that after everyone speaks to this one first? I mean, if we can talk about this and the other one.
So, and Mr. Chairman, you may want to hear from VDOT as well.
Yeah, I
too.
do want to hear.
Perfect.
Let's hear from agency next.
Mr. Chair, Joanne Maxwell from VDOT, and I think the subcommittee has done a fine job of spotting all the issues. And I think that's where we are at this point, is just spotting issues. We have no position on the bill, on the legislation, but I did want to point out a few things. I think a question was asked is, had we ever seen legislation? We've seen what we believe is draft legislation that was, at least advocated. One thing we would point out, the legislation provided for 91,000-pound vehicles, with 6 axles, but it left out any indication or specification as to axle spacing, which is very important in VDOT's world, particularly for structural rating, road rating. So that was one issue. Another issue we spotted with the legislation, I know the Virginia bill mentions congestion mitigation, infrastructure sustainability. In the federal legislation, at least the drafts that we have seen, the emphasis has been on safety, and granted, that is absolutely critical and important. But we've not seen anything that would indicate all of those other types of issues or factors were necessary to study or were being promoted with regard to the federal legislation. Again, very much drives our position as no position. There is just there are so many hypotheticals that basically we just can't face a decision on now, and I think the legislation realizes that. One thing I'd say about the study could conceivably be very expensive, depending on what the expectations are as to the level of detail, the level of data. Again, and it goes back to the hypothetical nature of what we'd be studying. It'd be very difficult for us to study a federal pilot that we don't even know the parameters for. We have a sense that we're talking about 91,000 pound vehicles with 6 axles, but we don't know what the spacings are. I think one of the things that, another issue we've spotted, and I think the study may try to get at that, is what about off the interstates? Certainly these vehicles, when they come to Virginia, are going to need to, they're gonna be points of origination probably and points of destination off the interstates. That would be a very critical aspect of or what we would have to consider in whether or not to participate. The language in this new draft for the substitute or the second enactment clause mentions, it's little I3. It mentions that we would use existing data to determine if certain routes and bridges should be excluded from the pilot program or project. And I think that's very critical. And it gets back to the spacing requirements and the vehicle configurations. This could end up being a very superficial evaluation if all we're expected to do is examine data that exists. If we don't know the axle spacing on these vehicles, there's probably not going to be data that exists. So it would be a very, probably not very detailed or meaningful examination of the data. If the expectation is that we go out and truly examine what bridges in Virginia could or could not accommodate these vehicles, we would have to assume different data or axle spacing requirements, in which case we would have to literally do load ratings for bridges. So that's where the significant expense would come in. So at the end of the day, there are issues that we would spot. Again, we have no position on the legislation, and the primary emphasis is on just right now the speculation and the hypothetical nature of what we would be studying and or deciding to participate in.
But isn't that what the work group is forming for? To determine, that's why he has this clause in there to determine all those things that you just discussed. So he's provided that.
Mr. Chair, that is true, but we would be studying or performing a study, I guess, trying to anticipate a hypothetical, which may be, not sure how meaningful it would ultimately be, and that may eventually drive cost. So again, but bottom line, we can do the study. It just, the level of expectation, the expectations with regard to how meaningful that information would be could be driven by what we know at the time.
Right, and we study hypotheticals all the time, so Delegate Collins.
Well, I will, let me ask you this question. So, the Interstate 81 corridor, VDOT has been begging, I shouldn't say VDOT's been begging, we've been begging VDOT, and VDOT has said they have not had the funds to do a tractor-trailer study on climbing lanes, that sort of thing. This would also, we're talking, that would be something that would be included in the study, would it not? Because we're adding 10,000 more pounds to the trucks, and so.
Climbing lanes specifically, potentially, I mean, I think we would have to, look at the we really have to brainstorm as far as the parameters of the study go to begin with. But I could envision
But you would then have the funding to actually sit down finally and take a look at Interstate 81 and tractor trailer traffic?
Oh, you're saying if there was funding for?
So you're saying that VDOT is going to do a study, but you don't know what you're going to do or what you're going to study. You're just going to say we're going to do a study. And it's going to cost some amount of money. My locality has been asking VDOT for years to do a study of an Interstate 81 corridor, and we have gotten the response of, we would love to help you, but. So if we were to have this, and then you were to look to say Interstate 81, I-95, Interstate 66, Interstate 64, Interstate 85, and say the increased tractor trailer traffic or decreased tractor trailer traffic, and the slopes and things of that nature, you would then say, here's the pros and cons of having heavier trucks on the road. But that you would finally actually do the studies, you would at least be able to have some sort of study in that regard. Is that my understanding?
Mr. Chair, I think that's feasible.
Thank you.
Okay. We do have other bills to hear today. This is this is a very important bill. I do realize that, but brevity is best. But Delegate Rock, let's go with you.
I'm looking for the word study in here, and I don't see it.
I think work group is what
Work
the-
group.
work group.
Sounds a lot more casual and will make recommendations. Sounds like a long way from what would typically be characterized as a study. Would there be any specific expenses that you would anticipate?
Mr. Chair, again, I think it depends on the level of detail and expectation as to the level of detail. In other words, if the study ended up, if we were purely spotting issues and identifying the issues that we would ultimately have to basically refine and decide when we knew what the actual federal pilot entailed, then I think that would be far less expensive study than one in which we said, let's now examine all of the secondaries and primary roads in Virginia and see whether they can handle 91,000-pound vehicles, 6-axle vehicles.
Right.
So I think it really depends on expectation.
And that's why he's creating a work group to do that. Okay. Delegate Davis.
When we talk about doing a study for a hypothetical, I'm gonna give you an example. Let me know if I'm on the right track. So the federal policy has tried to pass twice. It hasn't. Who knows what language they come back, but they potentially could come back with language that says it's open for unlimited numbers of trucks, 6 axles, 91,000 pounds, on any federal interstate in any of these participating states. They potentially could come back and say it's limited to interstates, federal interstates in these states that have certain congestion issues. They could come back and say it's limited to these interstates that actually haul these types of products. They could come back and say only interstates that are this length. Is that all legitimate things that could pop up, which would then really change the focus of what you need to be studying?
I think that is the case, and again, I'll go back to my favorite example, Mr. Chair, which is the axle spacing. If they came back and they said this would be, ideally, if we saw an axle spacing of 61 feet, we would have a much greater level of comfort in basically assessing the impacts on roadways because we basically have information that we could use to assess that. If we don't know, for instance, the axle spacings at all, they're not gonna dictate an axle spacing. That's where we would, that's a significant unknown or hypothetical.
Hence the bill, Mr. Chairman, because I want us to be at the table to be able to have Joanne, who's very knowledgeable, been in this space for decades, to be able to give our point into it. Decades makes you sound older than you are, but just say And I know, Mr. Chairman, you've got other folks.
Do we have anybody in the audience to speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Ken Hutchison on behalf of Anheuser-Busch, and with your permission, I'd like to just pass out this document here. It's got some good visuals on where around the country higher weight trucks are allowed to travel on the interstate, and also gives you kind of a look at modern trucks and how they've advanced over the last 3 decades. I will abbreviate my remarks and just say we appreciate the patrons' willingness to lead on this issue on behalf of Virginia's largest employers, manufacturers, and agribusiness interests. We think it is a bit unprudent to wait for others to lead when in Virginia we can lead. I will just state for folks who are concerned about some of the safety implications. There have been numerous studies, and the one I will point out that is, I think, most interesting is Idaho conducted a 10-year pilot and found no heightened safety risk. And the federal USDOT recently concluded a study that says the addition of a 6-axle reduces braking distance by a foot. So we believe that these modern trucks at 91,000 pounds on 6 axles are going to be safe. Clearly, as legislators, you all have the responsibility to ask what is the impact potential for Virginia's highways and primary and secondary roads. The USDOT study that I just referenced cited that these 91,000 pound 6-axle trucks are federal bridge compliant, and there is an anticipated 4.2% reduction in life cycle payment costs with this proposed configuration. In Minnesota, they did a study and found the addition of a 6-axle resulted in a 37% reduction in road wear and overall number of truck trips. So I think some of those facts are relevant, but the key here is the folks that are going to speak next, we're all interested in collecting data. We have nothing to fear from data collection because we believe very strongly that these trucks are safe and they are going to reduce wear and tear on the roads. And in fact, we believe if we are shipping more efficiently, we are going to reduce the number of truck trips necessary, thus increasing public safety and reducing wear and tear. And I'll conclude my remarks by introducing Katie Grove-Rogers from Anheuser-Busch, who will just give you a 1-minute snippet on the impact to our Williamsburg facility that brews Anheuser products.
Blessed be the bread.
Very, very, very brief. Katie Rogers with Anheuser-Busch, thank you for allowing me to address you today. Just a real quick snippet of what it looks like for our Williamsburg brewery in particular. It would benefit us by, first of all, safer roads, a reduction of 260,000 miles driven over our Virginia roads, a reduced environmental footprint. That would be a reduction of over 800,000 pounds of CO2 emitted into Virginia's atmosphere. Financial savings for our brewery. $2.32 million in savings for the Williamsburg brewery fleet alone. A reduction in those logistics costs by about $1.5 million annually makes us more competitive with our sister breweries. We compete with all of our breweries along the Atlantic coast from Newark all the way down to Georgia. And this relative competitiveness can translate to a reprioritization of Williamsburg Brewery within our network. Obviously that cascades into a win for our employees, allied businesses, and the Commonwealth. So it's a huge benefit for the brewery that's been there since 1979.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else to add anything new?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'll be very brief. Matt Wells on behalf of Westrock in favor of the legislation. Westrock is Virginia's largest paper products manufacturer. We have 8 facilities, 3,000 employees, and every year we contribute about $1 billion annually directly to the state's economy. As you might imagine, paperboard is heavy. We move about 3 million tons of goods in and out of Virginia every year. About 500,000 of that is by truck and stays completely within Virginia. Most of that is from our mill at Covington, which is the single largest exporter out of the Port of Virginia by volume. About 400,000 tons goes from Covington to that port every year, all of it staying in state. So some folks have asked about the benefit. That's one of the benefits. It's a direct benefit to us and it's a direct benefit to others because we have the port in the state as such a valuable asset. This program, if widely adopted, could allow us to realize significant savings, which would help the Covington mill compete more effectively, both internationally and with domestic competition. I do want to emphasize something that the patron said, which is that these vehicles are already on our roads today. Last year, DMV issued over 30,000 5% overload permits. There are exceptions for forest products, for ag products, a dozen others. Some of these things at 90,000 pounds now. Some of them on our interstates currently in the form of containerized cargo. So this is not something that is unique to the Commonwealth in all these instances. This body has found a happy medium between the needs of commerce and the needs of safety and of road wear and tear. We think that this is a common sense solution that does the same. Hope the committee will support the bill. Thank you.
Why did y'all present my bill?
Yeah, really. Why didn't they?
Well, you did way better.
A lot better job than I ever did.
Mr.
Very
Chair, to
quickly.
be very brief,
Yeah.
Katie Frazier on behalf of the Virginia Agribusiness Council. I've also been authorized to speak on behalf of the Virginia Forestry Association and the Virginia Poultry Federation and members like Smithfield Foods. We do support the legislation and thank Delegate Garrett for bringing it forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jeff Smith, representing Virginia Manufacturers Association and Virginia Wholesalers and Distributors Association, and we're in support of the legislation.
Very brief, Mr. Chairman, Stan Tradiak with Miller Coors. We're not quite as big as our friends from Williamsburg, but we ship about 7 million barrels of beer. And our efficiency people told us we could reduce our loads by about 18%. And Matt reminded me to let you know that about 30 states have these trucks running, and then states now by special permits. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, Scott Johnson on behalf of International Paper. We've got the Franklin Paper Mill that ships out of the port. Also have got corrugated container facility in Lynchburg that helps our friends at Steel deliver their product in Virginia Beach, and others. We support the legislation.
Anyone else? Anyone to speak in opposition to the bill? I know there's.
I can just stand up in place. I'm Tim Bentley with Norfolk Southern. I'm going to be exceptionally brief. I know we've heard a lot on the pro side of this bill. I think everyone on the committee has had very thoughtful questions about where we are. I'd like to make really just a couple of general comments. First of all, there's been a lot of reference to us having a seat at the table for the drafting and creation of this pilot, and of course we'll all end up relying on our congressional delegation to have the seat at the table to determine what that federal pilot looks like should it come out. And of course then Norfolk Southern argues most strenuously that once there is a pilot, it needs to be the people around this table who are then evaluating the pilot in conjunction with our experts at VDOT to end up determining what the best public policy is for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And ultimately, there's been a lot of reference made to the number of overweight trucks that operate currently. Every one of those permits that's allowed, whether it's for milk, whether it's for ocean-going containers, whether it's for forest products, and I'll defer to my a friend from the Trucking Association who may be speaking in a moment on some of those particulars. Every one of those permits has come exactly to a subcommittee like this and has been determined for whether or not that's a good public policy for the Commonwealth, and whether there need to be speed restrictions met, whether there need to be time restrictions, whether there need to be radius restrictions. All of those things have been determined by the General Assembly, and we would certainly argue that there's no reason here to change how that process operates. Just a couple of other points very quickly. I know that the Anheuser-Busch Brewery in Williamsburg is on Route 60 that goes by Busch Gardens. I know that Covington there is off the interstate. The port, obviously the railroad and the port are tremendous partners, but Hampton Boulevard, Terminal Boulevard in the city of Norfolk are the way to access that. All of these are non-interstate roads, and so that's ultimately where these heavy trucks would have to go. We talk about moving overweight trucks intrastate. Well, both destination and origin would have to be off of the interstates in that scenario. And I would just remind the subcommittee that there has not been any money attached to any of the proposed pilot programs at the federal level that could help us either with study costs or that could help us with any of the impact to the roadways themselves. And so, Norfolk Southern supports data collection. We certainly are not opposed to studying what the roads look like and to see whether there is a mechanism. It's our view that the Commonwealth should know what the status of our roadways is. So we don't oppose that, but these are some of the objections we have, and at this point I will sit down. Thank you.
I have a question for Norfolk Southern.
Yes, sir.
Please. I'm going to try to keep it brief as well. And we are beating this thing a little bit because this is going to have impact on a lot of our areas. So I have the inland port in my district. Sorry. I spoke with Stan Crockett there, and the intermodals that are going to be carrying the containers. He is under the impression that the containers can carry more weight. Do you have a position or opinion on that?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Collins, I would probably end up having to defer to my colleague at the Virginia Trucking Association who may be able to speak to that. My understanding is that we have heavy containers that come off of ships from overseas and are not unloaded at the port, and that's why we have heavier containers that are subject to that permit. Whether or not there would be some sort of an outbound intermodal going from the facility there in Front Royal back to the port, I'm afraid I can't speak to that. It's something we could get some more information for you on if you need it, but I don't know off the top of my head.
That's fine. Thank you.
And Delegate Collins, a lot of those containers are sealed, and that's why Congress deems them to be irreducible.
Correct.
So they come in with certain.
Right. Anyone else to speak in opposition as well?
Excuse me. I'm with CSX Transportation. That we oppose the bill for the same reasons that Tim said. This is a significant policy change. We would allow many more trucks to cross all of our roads, bridges, and highways. We think this is something that we don't need at this point. And Tim said better not. For the time of the motion.
Mr. Chairman, Rob Bohannon here on behalf of the Virginia Railroad Association. Railroad associations are short line railroad association. There's 9 short line railroads here in Virginia, places like Winchester and Western, Buckingham Branch, and Norfolk and Portsmouth Beltline. Short lines could feel the effects of such a pilot disproportionately because they really make their living off the 1 and 2 carload trains, the smaller loads that they help connect to the larger rail network that CSX and Norfolk Southern operate. Those are small carloads that could easily be taken up with a heavier truck. So there's a concern there. A couple of other details before we go forward. I think the 2016 DOT study on comprehensive truck size and weight limit study from Congress has been referenced. I want to make it clear that this study at the end recommended no changes be made to current truck size and weight laws. It's also important to note some other data from the study. They said that trucks weighing over 80,000 pounds had higher overall out-of-service rates and 18% higher brake violation rates compared to those at or below 80,000 pounds. Also, they found that in Washington State, the one state that was studied, there was significant crash rate increase of 47% for 91,000-pound trucks. I think we need to be clear that the end game for passing this legislation is to use it in Washington to show interest for such a pilot project. We do overweight permits here all the time, and when those overweight permits have been issued, and this body has looked at them, the railroad industry has not weighed in on that. We understand businesses need to adapt and need to have special exceptions made. But what you would do is be taking that permit process and just taking it statewide and not looking at it more carefully. Also want to point out that the last iteration of the pilot project at the federal level was 15 years. That's a long time. That's not a pilot project in our eyes. That's policy. I think that all these folks would invest, the money in this additional axle, additional equipment. That's for the long term. So that 15 years seems like a really, really long time to have a pilot. I just think that, again, if a pilot is enacted at the federal level, we can look at that, and Virginia should look at that thoughtfully and see if it makes sense for us. But they should wait until that is actually done. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Miles Laurie on behalf of the Virginia Transportation Construction Alliance. Our concern is the infrastructure of the Commonwealth, and if we accept at face value that the additional axle will evenly distribute the weight a little bit better, and that's probably true, but we're still talking about heavier trucks. Now, heavier trucks on bridges that are about 30% or so of our bridges are already deficient. Heavier is still heavier. And that's not good for the Commonwealth, not good for our infrastructure. That's why we oppose the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Joe Lurch from the Virginia Association of Counties. Just to relate the concerns that Mr. Laurie had for our members is the investment that we've made in partnership with VDOT on the state roads, and concerned about the impacts that a study might have of this nature. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mike Collins with the Virginia Municipal League, and joining Mr. Colleague, Mr. Lurch, and I am having concerns about this bill, especially as opposed to, as you know, Dr. Garrett being a member of City Council. Cities and towns maintain their own roads, and without when we get limited amount of money to assistance from VDOT to maintain these roads. So we also have concerns about the bill.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no other opposition to speak, I'll go at the end because I'm kind of in the either or.
Any other opposition?
Right, yeah.
You can go ahead then.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Chris Legault for Nationwide Insurance and the Property Casualty Insurance Association. They're very concerned about this from the safety aspects, especially. Cars are at a serious disadvantage with 80,000-pound trucks. Another 11,000 pounds just exacerbates that problem. So for those reasons, we would be in opposition to this.
Go ahead, Dale.
Are you ready, Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Dale Bennett with Virginia Trucking Association. Just want to relate to the subcommittee very quickly our discussion of the issue and final action. Our board talked about it. We took a vote. Absolutely no votes in support of it. The rest was 50-50 between opposed and neutral. And the carriers that voted neutral were those that fall for a lot of the people that are pushing this. The one thing I want to point out is, or have the committee understand, most of the truckload carriers get paid by the mile. So this is essentially asking them to carry more weight, but in order to do so, they're going to have to spend the capital to either retrofit the trailer to put an extra axle at a cost of $8,000 to $10,000 minimally, or buy a new trailer at $35,000 to $40,000. And that's very much their concern, that there'd be pressure to make a capital investment without any way to really be able to get a return on that. And then the tank truck industry just thinks that this is a step down the road with that weight limit becoming de facto, and their trailers can cost anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000. And if it becomes 91, they have no choice but to replace. They cannot retrofit. So that is their concern. We have to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Doug Davis.
At this time, in an attempt to maybe try to thread a needle, I'd like to propose a substitution if it's in order.
Motion.
Substitute motion.
Yes, sir, and if we may pass it out,
Do we need a second on that?
well, they need to see it.
Man, I like seconding.
Yeah, hold on.
And if I can speak to it once it's out.
There you have it. And I'm sure everybody in the room's gonna want it too, so.
Have a pile over here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Go ahead. Everybody at the table has one. Go ahead, Dr. Davis.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, what I'm trying to do here is kind of thread a needle. I believe that we're going to higher weight trucks in Virginia eventually. A lot of the states have already gone to 97,000 pounds on some of their own roads. Some states have already gone over 100,000 pounds on their own roads. We're going to have to be able to examine this scenario. But in trying to ensure we do the research, but don't jump the gun with the study that we're not quite sure what may or may not be in this legislation coming out of Washington, what this does is direct the Department of Transportation to study the condition of our highways in the Commonwealth and determine the feasibility of increasing access to those highways for the 6-axle truck semi-trailer combinations with weights up to 91,000 pounds, 97,000 pounds, as well as limits in excess of 100,000 pounds authorized by other states. And the rest of it is very similar to the second part of subsection 2, which was the amendment that was proposed earlier by the patron. What I'm trying to do with this here, there is no language right now for this Washington proposal. It came out twice, it's failed twice, who knows what pops back up. But it very well could come out with language in it that says you don't get to leave this study for a period of time. If they're only going to let 10 states in, they don't want 3 of them walking out the door a year later. So it may come out with language that preempts us from being able to walk out. It very well may come out and say that there's no money sitting there for reimbursements of any costs or that sort of scenario. And then it also doesn't address the impacts to our roads. A couple of the studies that have come out, and the one I thought most telling was the comprehensive truck size and weight limit study in 2015, which determined that a 6-axle 91,000 pound configuration would result in a 2.4 to 4.2% decrease in lifestyle costs to roads. And when it came to bridges, it would impact over 6,200 bridges across the nation that would have to be strengthened or replaced just to go to 91,000 pounds. And across the nation, they put a price tag on that about 1.1 billion. So my thought is Washington never acts quickly. So with this substitute, it allows us to go forward, look at what the implications of costs are to moving forward with a federal study should it ever come out. And if it doesn't come out, still provides the study for the use of the Commonwealth, because one day we're going to see higher weight trucks on our roads, but we need to be prepared for it. And I hope that kind of starts threading the needle a little bit, Mr. Chairman.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
The amendment. First of all, let me just say I think that this is a great approach, because I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to get this patchwork kind of approach under control. So I think that this is really great. The question I do have is, how would this study be paid for? Would VDOT just pay for this out of existing funds, or do we then need to refer this to appropriations
That's probably a better question for
additional
Joanne.
funding as well?
Yeah,
Joanne.
that's.
Mr. Chair, I just don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I do know, we looked at originally at the study called for in another enactment clause and all, and we felt like it would cost $4,500,000. But nevertheless, we would need to look at this and evaluate it. But again, a lot of it may depend on the level of detail and the expectations. So, and we may have some information that's already available through the Research Council, et cetera, but I want them to look at this.
Would a motion to report the substitute with referral to appropriation be appropriate?
Mr. Chairman.
Doug Garrett.
I think this is a great bill for next year. I think that's basically what we're responsive to what I think I heard Delegate Jones and Delegate Collins and Delegate Rock asking, and you as well, sir. It strikes me it's a great bill for next year. We absolutely need to study this and see its impact. My bill is simply saying and putting in a posture that should the federal government, and to your point, I don't know if Tim, we talked about the congressional delegation, they're going to listen to what we do in Richmond because we do things right here in Richmond. They're not going to necessarily do what we say, but at least we'll give them some guidance. You mentioned VDOT is going to ultimately decide whether, in fact, they're going to enter this pilot program. That's what my bill envisions, rather than telling them and sending us up to the 13th floor. I serve on the Transportation Subcommittee, so I would be dealing with it up there, but I don't know the fiscal impact of this, and hence why I think, and it's late in the game. Mr. Chairman, you also serve with us on appropriations. It's probably a little bit, Delegate Davis, I absolutely appreciate where you're going, and Delegate Reed as well, but it's probably something that this particular posture is something we should look at next year. You mentioned the length of, Rob, you mentioned the study. My understanding of that 2016 study is they said, but they need more data. That sort of finishes out that statement. You mentioned the length of the pilot program. The length of the pilot program, all my bill says is that shall not exceed 15 years. It could be a 5-year program. It could be a smaller program. VML said we've got it. I don't have an interstate through Lynchburg. Yeah, we pay for the roads in Lynchburg, but I don't have an interstate. So this pilot program is not going to affect the city of Lynchburg directly per se. And you mentioned the insurance, and Chris, you mentioned insurance and safety issues. That's the reason for the pilot program, is to absolutely make sure that the feds are going to, and I want to have a Chris Legault there at the table as part of this stakeholder process to say, we got to look at the fiscal impact, not just the safety, the specific safety and the efficiency issues to it, but look and see how much this is going to cost from you guys, because it's your actuaries are going to have to add all that to look at premiums. So I get it, that I understand all of those pieces. Hence why I carried this bill in the first place. Mr. Chairman, you've been incredibly gracious with your time and your committee's time, gentlemen. I really do appreciate that. I know you've got a lot of other folks here to present, and
You're in front of us.
but this is a great bill for next year.
So I just want to make sure that we understand
So we have a substitute in front of us. We do not have a second yet. We have a substitute in front of us. The patron obviously does not like the substitute. We do not have a second yet.
But, and so I want to make clear what it is. Delegate Garrett's bill right now says that if the federal government were to vote tonight, obviously they're not going to do that, but this is an extreme example. If we pass Delegate Garrett's bill, we have put our name on the congressional dance card. They're only going to dance with 10 people, and hopefully we're one of those 10 on that list. But in the interim, if that doesn't happen tomorrow and happens sometime 5 years down the line, we're going to have a work group together to try to examine the impact. Delegate Davis's issue here is that we're not putting our name on the dance card. We're going to sit in the corner and hope that we're going to see how this all plays out with everybody else, and so that and see if that's something we actually want to do. I just want to make sure I understand that that's what.
Well, for clarification purposes, if I may, it's pretty close to that, yes, Delegate Collins, except that we're not putting our name on the dance card now, but hopefully the study that I've put forward that tries to thread a needle, if that's complete, when the federal government, if they do come out with another opportunity for another 10 states, we'll be prepared to join if we so desire. So with this, we move forward with the study, but it does not exempt us from jumping into the study should a time arise that the feds have one.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Garrett.
just to also finish the cycle, so I'm not the Speaker of the House, but I would deem this non-germane. This is different from authorizing the Department of Transportation to enroll in a federal pilot program. So if you want to kill the bill, then advance this, and it's just a clever way of doing that, because I would guess a Bobby Orrick or a Speaker would say, this is not germane to what we brought here. Hence, with all due respect to Delegate Davis, I think this is a bill that has absolute merit. Delegate Collins, clearly it resonates with you, sir, but it's probably a bill for next year, frankly.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Delegate Collins.
So and obviously we know that the federal government's been kicking this can around for a couple of years, and the likelihood of them doing anything substantive in the next year is probably slim and none. But my other concern is, the concerns I walked in here with are, I think, somewhat alleviated by Delegate Garrett's number 2. All right, I think I know where I am on these two things.
All right, so we have a substitute in front of us. We do not have a second.
Right.
Okay, so without a second, we go back to the original bill.
Right.
At this moment, we're looking for a motion.
Move to report the original bill.
We have
With the amendment.
With the amendment. Or
Substitute.
with the substitute. Okay.
Amendments.
Amendments. Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, Mr. Chairman.
we have a motion and a hesitant second. Let's go to the board.
It carries.
Your bill reports to full.
Mr. Chairman and gentlemen, this is why Richmond works. I have absolutely imposed upon your time, and I sincerely appreciate your committee's consideration.
All right, Delegate Stolly, so sorry. Come forward. The room is clear.
They're all here for me.
I thought they were all here for you. Yeah, I don't know what's wrong.
I've only heard one other discussion, and that was the Menhaden.
Delegate Stolly, tell us about your simple bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, just for a second. I need to go upstairs.
Yeah, I gotta go to rules.
But I've got to go to rules as well, but I don't want to leave you without a quorum. What
Can we,
happens if both of us walk away?
can we hear this really quickly?
Sure.
Because he's the only one we have in front of us.
All right, no problem.
Very quickly.
I'm sorry. And then we'll move on. Okay.
I will try and keep this very short, Mr. Chairman. I do have a line amendment I might, new to me too, so. Okay. On line 58.
Okay. I think I have that.
No, you don't.
Not this one.
Have it. So line 58, after design, strike primarily. Single word strike. Line 58.
Strike primarily.
Strike primarily. So it currently reads, means a jet-powered aircraft designed for military.
Okay.
Okay? Mr. Chairman, I would direct the committee's attention to line 67 on the bill, and this states what current code is. It says public aircraft means an aircraft used exclusively in the service of any state or political subdivision thereof or the federal government. Mr. Chairman, ATAC is a company headquartered in Newport News, Virginia. They do one thing, and that is to train our military. They act as op force, as opposing force to train our Air Force and Navy pilots in combat. This company owns fighter jets that it uses for op force training of our military. It also leases jets that it uses for its op force training. At some point, the determination was made that because some of the jets are leased, you have to now pay taxes on the leased jets. The function of the jets are exactly the same, but because one group of jets, you're not allowed to buy them, they're made in Canada, they won't sell the jets, you can only lease them. So the planes used that are owned are not taxed, the planes that are leased are taxed. What this bill simply does is clarify the definition, the current definition of public aircraft. It says that it includes any fighter or attack jet that is leased or owned by a private entity, provided that aircraft operations are conducted exclusively for the purpose of military combat training and service to the federal government.
Any questions for the patron? We have a motion to adopt the line amendment.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All right. Any questions for the patron? Anybody here to speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, there are several folks, if you would like to hear them, or if you have business to conduct.
I would move to report.
Second. Okay, let's go to the board.
Don't stop it.
I'm out of questions.
Yeah, exactly. Don't say train. Okay. So
I'll fill it for you.
I think what's happening, your bill reports, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
I can come back down. I just need to run up to rules to see where I'm at.
So, yeah, let's at ease for a moment. Can several of them have to leave, right? Yeah, as well as as well as me. Can we recess until 6 o'clock?
Alright,
Yes,
hold
sir.
on, wait, come back.
No, I'm
Wait.
sorry.
So here's the plan. 'Cause you and I gotta get back to CNO.
Right.
So let's go into,
Bob, what's the appropriate, is it recess or at East till 6?
At East, I think.
Okay. Alright, so, I'll take the blame. Welcome to the greatest show on earth. It's never a dull moment around here. Coffee break, see you at 6. Apologize.
Sorry.
Personal.
Okay, sorry.
Going back downstairs.
Yeah, I can probably witness that. Not you though.
Oh, you're fine now. Oh,
So I'm gonna go find Bagby.
What, Garrett?
Garrett?
It was an amendment, 2 amendments.
So we'll go and then get you up here.
Yep.
Alright, I'm gonna go find Bagby.
Well, I gotta
get
I say fat lady, not fat guy. That guy can't argue with that. Fat lady.
We're finalizing. So, yeah, we've gone over a couple of generations, but I know you've asked for, you wanna know.
A lot of y'all hours
How much beat up?
spent in here.
Yeah.
Yes, I asked Allison that earlier today, and I told her she might wanna touch base with you, so I wanted to touch base with you. I don't wanna go behind people.
No, I understand. So
Well,
we're-
I truncated my remarks as well, so, probably out of it.
I got a general.
Well, since you're up by 2, then you got 50% of it.
How's that being ballpark, you know, you can ask me questions, ask.
Well, you know, have you noticed?
Yeah, but, you know, I need to go back and look at the budget recommendation. If they get to it.
I got somebody in there, but I probably ought to go up there too.
They're not slow up there. They were one bill while I missed this week,
So,
so one upstairs.
were you in stickers?
My coworker was, I was not, I was probably with you.
I was, it was reported to me. Hey, Dale.
They recess till 6.
Dale, if you need.
Patrick was just looking for you, sir. I'm back, I come back at 6 o'clock. Ain't nothing, can't wait for that.
What was that?
He did not look happy at all.
Well, because he sat around all yesterday waiting for this. In the other subcommittee, he was one of the dutiful that sat around for all of it.
Do you know, based on the docket, would his bill be up first?
So usually they just kind of do it by who's in here. So the reason they were comfortable going at ease right there is there weren't any patrons, so they didn't have anything to talk about anyway.
I heard y'all didn't, yeah, that's what I heard.
Do you know if Patrick's coming back?
Yeah, he actually went to go look for her.
Oh, okay. Because Patrick gave me a timing, and I was wondering, okay, I was wondering if he wanted, since we got a break, if he wanted me to go ahead and find the substitutes with the change.
Yes.
If that would be easier,
The last sentence.
including the default app-on color, is that what?
We'll use that for it would be included in your. You don't need that. Just the default color.
Anyway, I'm gonna
Okay.
come up there, so what, 6 months?
It's on 6.
Okay.
The room's packed.
Yeah,
We
I
support
know.
it, we support you.
That's just the language that Patrick
Right,
touched
yeah.
earlier, so.
Yeah.
I'm Emma, by the way. Hi.
Punch it out.
Nice to meet you. I think we were on emails